He thought his little ranch made him unworthy, until she found the letter he hid away. The letter was not meant for Clara Bennett's eyes, but by sundown, it would change the way she looked at every quiet kindness Caleb Rusk had ever given her. It lay hidden beneath a loose board in the tack room of his old barn, folded twice, worn soft at the edges, and marked with the dust of a man who had carried too many words inside him for too many years. Caleb had written it on a winter night when the wind struck the walls like fists and the lantern flame shook as if it was afraid. He had never sent it. He had never planned to. Men like Caleb did not speak of love when their roof leaked, their fences leaned, and their pockets held more prayer than coin. At least that was what he told himself. The town of Mercy Creek sat low between the brown hills of western Colorado, where the sun burned hard in summer, and the winters came down sharp enough to make a man question every choice he had ever made. Caleb's place, the split-rail ranch, was 3 miles beyond town, past a crooked cottonwood and a dry wash where cattle sometimes wandered when the grass got thin. It was not much to look at. A small house with a sagging porch, a barn with gray boards and one door that never closed right, 80 head of cattle in a good year, fewer in a bad one, a windmill that complained in the breeze, a strip of pasture that turned gold too early when rain stayed away. But Caleb worked it like it was a kingdom. He rose before first light, pulled on boots still carrying yesterday's dust, and stepped into the cold with quiet purpose. His hands were rough from rope, reins, and hammer handles. His face had lines carved by sun and worry. He was 36, though some days he felt older, especially when he stood at the fence and looked toward the neighboring land. That was where Clara Bennett lived. Her place was called Willow Bend, named for the trees that leaned over the creek behind her house. It had been her father's land before it became hers, and though it was not large, it seemed to breathe easier than Caleb's. Her garden grew clean rows of beans, squash, and onions. Her hens gave steady eggs. Her smokehouse stayed full enough through winter. Even her porch rail looked straight, painted white each spring by her own hand. Clara was 32, strong in the way frontier women often had to be, with kind brown eyes and a calm face that did not give away more than she wished. She wore plain dresses, kept her hair pinned back when working, and had a way of standing still that made other folks settle down around her. Caleb had known her for 7 years. For 7 years, they had traded help without making much talk of it. When Clara's mare went lame near the South Ridge, Caleb led the animal home by moonlight. When Caleb caught a fever one bitter January, Clara came every morning with broth, clean cloths, and a stern look that kept him from trying to rise too soon. When a spring flood tore through both their lower fences, they worked side by side for 2 days in mud up to their ankles, saying little, understanding much. Everybody in Mercy Creek saw it. Everybody except, it seemed, Caleb Rusk. He saw Clara as a woman made for a better life than he could offer. He saw her standing in her garden with sunlight on her sleeves and thought she belonged beside a man with a fine house, sound barns, and cattle enough to fill a valley. He looked at his own land and saw every weak place, every cracked beam, every thin calf, every bill folded in a drawer. He counted his failings like a preacher counts sins. And because he counted them so well, he never counted the way Clara looked at him when she thought he was not watching. On a cool Monday morning in October, Caleb rode over to Willow Bend with a sack of oats tied behind his saddle. Clara had mentioned her feed was running low after taking in 2 orphaned colts from a widow outside town. She had not asked for help, but Caleb knew the sound of need when it was hidden inside a simple sentence. She was near the barn when he arrived, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a streak of flour still on one cheek from morning bread. A chestnut horse shifted behind the fence, tossing its head at the smell of oats. "You did not have to bring that," Clara said. Caleb stepped down and loosened the sack. "I was headed this way." "No, you were." He looked at the road behind him, then back at her. "Could have been." A small smile touched her mouth, but it did not stay long. Something worried her. He saw it in the way her hand rested too tight on the fence post. "What is it?" he asked. Clara glanced toward the house, then toward the road to town. "A letter came this morning." Caleb's fingers went still on the rope. "From who?" "Elias Ward." The name landed between them like a stone dropped in a bucket. Caleb knew of Elias Ward. Everybody did. Ward owned land north of Mercy Creek, land so wide a rider could spend half a day crossing it. He had money in cattle, rail freight, and a new grain mill near Denver. He had a clean black carriage, polished boots, and the kind of smile that made folks feel measured. Clara's father had once spoken well of him. Caleb remembered that too. "He's coming through town," Clara said, "end of the week." Caleb bent to lift the oat sack because it gave his hand something to do. "That's so. He says he wants to pay respects. Said Papa always hoped our families might stay close." The chestnut horse breathed hard through the fence. Somewhere in the barn, a hinge creaked in the wind. Caleb carried the oats inside and set them down near the stall. His heart felt heavy, but his voice stayed even. He had practiced that skill for years. "Ward is a steady man," he said. "A woman could do worse." Clara watched him from the doorway. Her face changed just a little. "A woman could also do better than being spoken for like a horse at auction." Caleb turned. "That is not what I meant." "What did you mean?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and almost said it. The words rose inside him, old and aching. "I mean I have loved you in every quiet way I know. I mean I have been a coward with clean reasons. I mean I do not want him near you." But the barn roof above them showed daylight through two narrow cracks. His coat sleeve was patched at the cuff. His boots were worn pale at the toes. So Caleb swallowed the truth. "I only mean he can offer plenty," he said. Clara's eyes held on him for a long moment, and what he saw there made him wish he had been braver. Then she nodded once, slow and quiet. "Maybe plenty is not always what a heart is hungry for." Before he could answer, she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Caleb in the barn with the smell of hay, the shifting horse, and a silence that felt like judgment. That evening, after he rode home, Caleb sat at his small table with the old hidden letter laid before him. For the first time in years, he unfolded it. And as the lantern trembled beside him, he did not hear the rider who had stopped outside his barn, nor the soft step that crossed toward the tack room door. The step outside Caleb's tack room was not loud, but on a quiet ranch at night, even a soft sound can carry like a warning. Caleb looked up from the letter. The lantern on the table bent in the draft, throwing his shadow against the wall. For a moment he thought it might be a loose board knocking, or the wind dragging a branch along the barn. Then his bay gelding gave a low sound from his stall, not frightened, only watchful. Somebody was there. Caleb folded the letter fast, but not fast enough to hide the look on his face. A man could hide paper. He could not so easily hide the years written across him. "Who's there?" he called. The tack room door moved a few inches, and Clara Bennett stood in the narrow opening with her shawl pulled close around her shoulders. Her cheeks were touched red by the cold ride. A loose strand of hair had fallen against her temple. In one hand, she held a small cloth bundle tied with string. Caleb rose so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "Clara." "I'm sorry," she said. "I knocked at the house. When you didn't answer, I saw the lantern in the barn." "You rode here after dark." "It's not far." "That does not make it wise." Her eyes moved to the folded paper in his hand, then back to his face. She did not ask about it. That was worse somehow. Clara had a way of leaving a man room to confess, and Caleb had spent years filling that room with silence. "I brought the salve you asked about last week," she said, lifting the bundle. "For that cut on your hand." He looked down. The cut across his knuckles had opened again while he worked the south gate that afternoon. He had forgotten it. Clara had not. "That could have waited until morning," he said. "I know." The words rested there between them. Caleb took the bundle from her. Their fingers touched only for a breath, but he felt it clear through his chest. He stepped back because standing too near her made truth dangerous. "Thank you," he said. Clara looked around the tack room at the saddle hanging from a peg, the coil of rope, the dusty window, the cracked leather bridle Caleb had been meaning to mend. Her gaze returned again to the letter. She did not smile this time. "Did I interrupt something?" "No." It was too quick. Clara heard it. He knew she did. She drew her shawl tighter. "Then I'll head back." "At least let me ride with you." I can find my way. I know you can, that is not the point. For the first time that night, a little fire showed in her eyes. What is the point, Caleb? He had no ready answer. Outside, the wind moved across the yard and shook the barn door against its latch. The gelding shifted in his stall. A rope swung slowly from a hook, making a small, dry sound against the wall. Caleb set the salve on the table beside the letter. The point is a woman should not have to ride alone at night because a neighbor cannot keep his hands from bleeding. Clara looked at him for a long moment. A neighbor, she said softly. He hated the word as soon as it left her mouth. Not because she had said it, but because he had built a whole shelter out of that word and hidden inside it. Clara turned toward the door. Wait, Caleb said. She stopped but did not turn around. He picked up the letter. His hand tightened around it until the paper bent. There were moments in a life when a man knows he is standing at the edge of something. Caleb felt it then. He could hand her the letter. He could open the door he had kept shut so long the hinges had rusted in his heart. He could let Clara read the truth in the plain, clumsy words he had written by a winter lantern. Instead, he looked at the worn floorboards and saw the place where rain had come through last spring. He saw the bank note tucked in the tin box under his bed. He saw Elia's ward stepping down from a clean carriage with polished boots and a future wide enough to shelter her from every hard season. Caleb lowered the letter. I'll saddle Buck, he said. I'll see you home. Clara's shoulders fell just a little. It was such a small movement that most people would have missed it, but Caleb had loved her too long not to see when he had hurt her. No, she said, don't trouble yourself. It's no trouble. That is the trouble. She left before he could stop her. Caleb stood in the tack room and listened to her boots cross the barn floor. He heard the rustle of her skirts as she mounted. He heard the soft command she gave her mare, gentle and steady, the same way she spoke to frightened animals and stubborn men. By the time he reached the barn door, Clara was riding past the cottonwood, her back straight, her figure dark against the silver wash of moonlight. He did not follow. He told himself she wanted space. He told himself she was safe. He told himself a dozen decent things, and every one of them sounded like fear wearing its Sunday coat. The next morning, Mercy Creek was already stirring when Caleb rode into town for nails and lamp oil. The main street held the usual sounds: wagon wheels, harness bells, men calling from the blacksmith shop, a dog barking at nothing. Dust lifted beneath hooves and hung in the pale sun. Caleb tied Buck outside Harlan's Mercantile and stepped in. The talk stopped for half a second. That was enough. Old Mrs. Pike pretended to study a barrel of apples. Tom Braddock at the counter cleared his throat. Behind the register, Harlan wiped the same spot with a cloth that had given up on being useful. Caleb set his money down. 2 pounds of nails, lamp oil, coffee if you've got it. Harlan nodded, got it. The door opened behind him, and cold air slipped in. Morning, a smooth voice said. Caleb turned. Elia's ward stood in the doorway wearing a dark coat brushed clean of road dust. He was taller than Caleb expected, with silver at his temples and gloves soft enough to say he did not fix his own fences. His smile was pleasant. His eyes were not unkind, but they carried the calm of a man used to being welcomed. You must be Mr. Rusk, Elia said. I passed your place coming in, Split Rail Ranch, isn't it? Caleb's jaw tightened. That's right. Fine stretch of land, rough but honest. The words sounded friendly. Still, Caleb felt the sting beneath them. Before he could answer, Clara entered the Mercantile. Her gaze found Caleb first. Then it found Elia's. And in that small pause, with half the town pretending not to watch, Caleb saw that Elia's ward had not come to Mercy Creek only to pay respects. He had come ready to claim a future. And tucked inside Caleb's coat, close to his heart, the hidden letter seemed to burn like a coal. Clara stepped inside Harlan's Mercantile with the cool morning behind her, and 2 men in front of her, who could not have looked more different if the town itself had arranged them for judgment. Elia's ward stood clean and certain, his dark coat smooth across his shoulders, his hat held politely in one hand. Caleb Rusk stood near the counter with dust on his boots, a faded work shirt, and one hand partly hidden by his coat where the folded letter rested close to his chest. Clara noticed that hidden hand. She noticed everything about Caleb, though he still seemed determined not to believe it. "Miss Bennett," Elias said warmly, stepping toward her, "it has been too long." "It has," Clara answered. He took her hand and bowed over it with old-fashioned care. Around them, Mercy Creek pretended to continue its business. Mrs. Pike touched every apple in the barrel without choosing one. Tom Braddock studied a shovel handle as if it held scripture. Harlan stared at his shelves and moved nothing. Caleb looked toward the window. Elias smiled. "Your father spoke of this town often. I was sorry I could not come sooner after his passing." "Thank you," Clara said. "He remembered your family kindly." "I remember him the same way." Elias glanced at Caleb, then back to Clara. "I hoped I might call on you this afternoon if you are receiving visitors." Clara felt the whole room lean closer without moving. She wanted to look at Caleb, but she did not yet. "This afternoon is not best," she said. "I have work at Willow Bend." "I would not mind a walk through the place. Your father always praised the creek line." Caleb's jaw worked once, but he said nothing. Clara saw it then, clear as the sunlight through the mercantile window. Caleb was not angry at Elias. He was making room for him, quietly, painfully, like a man stepping away from a warm fire because he had decided someone else deserved the heat. The knowing of it hurt her more than any insult could have. "You may call tomorrow," she told Elias. "Late morning." Elias bowed his head. "I will look forward to it." Caleb picked up his parcel from Harlan and moved toward the door. "Caleb," Clara said. He stopped. It was the first time she had spoken his name since the night before, and the sound of it changed his face. Only for a moment. Then he put the old calm back on, the one he used when cattle were sick, money was short, or something inside him was breaking. "Yes, ma'am." The politeness struck her like a closed gate. "I need a word with you." Elias gave a courteous smile and turned toward a shelf of canned peaches. The town continued pretending. Caleb stepped outside with Clara. The boardwalk was bright with sun. A wagon rattled past carrying sacks of flour. Across the road, a blacksmith's hammer rang steady, sharp, and far too cheerful for the tightness between them. Clara lowered her voice. "You left your letter on the tack room table last night." Caleb went still. The color left his face in a slow, quiet way. "I did." "You did." His hand went to his coat, then stopped. He knew before he touched it. In his hurry to follow her to the barn door, he had taken the wrong folded paper. The old feed receipt was in his coat. The letter was not. Clara watched shame rise in him like a storm cloud. "Did you read it?" he asked. "No." His eyes lifted to hers. "I saw my name," she said. "That was enough to tell me it was not mine unless you chose to give it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Caleb looked as if that mercy hurt him more than if she had read every word. "I'll come fetch it," he said. "I brought it." She reached into the pocket of her skirt and took out the folded letter. The paper looked small in her hand, too small to carry the weight it seemed to carry. She held it toward him. Caleb did not take it at once. The street moved around them. Horses pulled against bits. A child laughed near the water trough. Somewhere close by, a screen door slapped shut. But between Caleb and Clara, the morning had gone silent. "You should burn it," he said. "Is that what you want?" He gave a rough breath. "It does not matter what I want." "There you are again," she said softly. His eyes narrowed with confusion. Standing aside and calling it kindness. Caleb took the letter then, but his fingers trembled. It was a small tremble, almost hidden, yet Clara saw it. She had seen those hands mend gates in freezing rain. She had seen them calm a spooked horse, lift a sick calf, carry water to her kitchen when her pump went dry. She had never seen them tremble over anything except the truth. He tucked the letter inside his coat. "Ward is a good man." "Maybe." "He can give you more than this town, more than hard winters and patched fences." "Do you think I don't know what winters are?" "That is not what I mean." What do you mean, Caleb? His mouth opened, but nothing came. Clara's eyes shone, though she did not let tears fall. She had learned young that tears did not mend roofs or plant seed. Still, there were feelings a person could not keep hidden forever. If you have something to say to me, say it before another man starts speaking over your silence. Caleb looked at her, and for one bright second she thought he would do it. She thought he would finally set down the burden he had been carrying and trust her enough to let her carry part of it. Then Elias stepped out of the mercantile behind them. "Miss Bennett," he said gently, "I hope I am not interrupting." Caleb stepped back at once. "Too quickly." Clara's heart sank. "No," Caleb said, "I was just leaving." He tipped his hat to her, gave Elias a short nod, and crossed the street toward his horse without looking back. Dust rose around his boots with each step. Clara watched him untie Buck mount and ride toward the west road as if something behind him might call him back if he did not move fast enough. Elias stood beside her in silence. After a moment he said, "He seems a dependable sort." Clara's voice was quiet. "He is more than that." Elias looked at her then, and for the first time since arriving, his confidence faltered. "If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because the truth inside Caleb's letter has not yet been spoken, and silence on the frontier can wound deeper than any storm." That night, Caleb did not go inside his house until the moon was high. He sat on the edge of the water trough outside the barn, the letter open in his hands. The words stared up at him, plain and clumsy and honest. "Clara, I have loved you in ways I never had courage to name." He read that first line until his eyes burned. Then he folded the letter, struck a match, and held the flame beneath one corner. But before the fire could catch, a horse came running hard down the road from Willow Bend. The match burned close to Caleb's fingers before he remembered to shake it out. He rose from the water trough with the letter still in one hand and stared toward the road. The horse came fast under the moon, hooves striking dry earth with a hard, uneven rhythm. It was Clara's gray mare, Juniper. Caleb knew that horse's shape even in darkness, knew the white mark down her face, knew the way she carried her head when frightened. But Clara was not in the saddle. The mare thundered into the yard with loose reins flying and stopped near the barn as if she had come searching for the one man she trusted to understand. Her sides worked hard, dust clung to her neck. One stirrup hung twisted. Caleb's blood went cold. "Easy, girl," he said, though his own voice did not sound easy at all. He caught the reins and ran a hand down Juniper's neck. No blood, no broken strap. The saddle sat crooked, but not enough to explain an empty seat. His eyes moved down the road toward Willow Bend, where the night lay dark between the fields. He tucked the letter inside his shirt, grabbed his rifle from the barn wall more out of habit than plan, and saddled Buck with hands that moved faster than thought. There was no time for fear to make a speech. Fear simply climbed into his chest and rode with him. The road to Willow Bend had never felt so long. Moonlight silvered the grass. The cottonwoods stood black against the pale sky. Buck's hooves beat a steady charge, and Caleb leaned low, urging him on. Every bend in the road showed him nothing. Every empty stretch made his stomach tighten. He found Clara half a mile from her house, sitting beside the road with one hand pressed to her ankle and the other gripping a broken fence rail. Her hat lay in the dust. Her hair had fallen loose over one shoulder. A lantern rested nearby, its flame still alive behind cracked glass. Caleb pulled Buck up hard and dropped from the saddle. "Clara." She looked up. Relief crossed her face so quickly it nearly broke him. "I'm all right," she said. "You are not all right." "I said I'm all right." "And you say that when you are not." That stopped her. He knelt in the dust beside her. His hands wanted to reach, to gather, to hold, but he kept them careful. There were rules a man followed when he had not earned the right to touch more than duty allowed. "What happened?" "The north fence was down near the wash," she said. "The colts got out. I came with the lantern to drive them back, but Juniper spooked when a jackrabbit burst from the brush. I came off." Caleb looked at her ankle. "Can you stand?" "I tried." Her face tightened in a way she tried to hide. He turned his head and breathed once through his nose, hard. Anger flared in him, not at her, not at the horse, but at the whole wide world that could throw Clara Bennett into the dirt and leave her sitting there alone under the moon. Then he saw the fence rail in her hand. It had not broken from weather. The wood had been cut. Caleb took it gently and ran his thumb over the fresh mark. A saw had made that clean edge, not rot, not wind, not cattle pressure. Clara saw his face change. "What is it?" He did not answer at first. He stood and looked toward the dark line of her north pasture. The night was quiet now, but too quiet. A man who had lived on land long enough knew when silence was natural and when it was holding its breath. "This rail was cut," he said. Clara's eyes widened. "Who would do that?" Caleb thought of drifting hands, men passing through, boys making trouble. Then, unwillingly, he thought of Elia's ward arriving with clean gloves and a future too smooth. He pushed the thought away as unfair. A rich man did not need to cut fence in the dark. Still, need was not the only thing that made men do wrong. "We'll worry on that after I get you home," Caleb said. "I can ride." "You cannot." "Caleb." He looked down at her. "Argue with me tomorrow." Before she could protest again, he bent and lifted her into his arms. Clara went still. She was not heavy, but the feel of her there against him nearly took the strength from his knees. Her hand rose by instinct and caught his shoulder. The smell of dust, lavender soap, and night air came with her. For one breath, his whole heart forgot the broken fence, the dark road, and every fear he had ever used to keep away from her. Then she whispered, "You came fast." He carried her toward Buck. "Juniper came without you." "I knew she'd go to your place." "You knew?" Her eyes lowered. "She knows the road." Caleb helped her onto the saddle, then mounted behind her because there was no other safe way. He kept one arm around her to steady her and took the reins with the other. Clara sat stiff at first, careful of the space between them, but the first step made her ankle jolt and her shoulders tremble. Caleb felt it. "Lean back," he said. "I'm fine." "Clara." His voice was low, but something in it made her stop fighting. Slowly, she let her back rest against his chest. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. It was both comfort and torment, having her trust him with her weight when he had failed so long to trust her with his truth. They rode in silence toward Willow Bend. Her house came into view at last, pale in the moonlight, with smoke gone cold in the chimney and the yard gate open. Caleb helped her down and carried her inside. The kitchen was neat, warm from the day's baking, with a blue bowl on the table and a cloth laid over rising dough. Ordinary things, dear things, the kind of things a man might spend his life protecting if he had the courage to ask. He settled her in the chair by the stove and found a basin, cloth, and the salve she had brought him the night before. When he knelt to remove her boot, his fingers hesitated. Clara watched him. "It is only an ankle." "It is your ankle." The words came out too tender. Her eyes softened. He worked carefully, easing the boot away while she gripped the chair arm. The ankle was swollen but not twisted wrong. He wrapped it in cool cloth and tied it firm. "You'll need rest," he said. "No chores tomorrow." She gave him a dry look. "Do you plan to milk the cow too?" "Yes." "And feed the hens?" "Yes." "And mend the north fence?" His jaw tightened. "Before sunrise." Clara leaned back, tired now, but her gaze did not leave him. "You would do all that and still call yourself only a neighbor." Caleb's hands stilled on the bandage. For a moment the room seemed to shrink around them. The stove ticked as it cooled. A horse moved outside. The lantern on the table cast gold over Clara's face, showing the pain she tried to hide and the hope she was tired of hiding. He reached into his shirt and touched the folded letter. Clara saw the movement. "Were you going to burn it?" she asked. Caleb looked at the floor. "I thought it might be best." "For who?" He had no answer that did not shame him. Then a sound came from outside. Not a horse, not the wind. A board creaked on the porch. Caleb rose slowly, every sense sharp. Clara sat up straighter, her face pale in the lantern light. Someone was standing just beyond the kitchen door. And whoever it was had followed them home. Caleb lifted one finger to his lips, though Clara had already gone still. The kitchen lantern made the window glass dark and shining. In it, Caleb could see a faint reflection of himself standing near the stove, one hand close to the rifle he had leaned against the wall. Clara sat with her bandaged ankle resting on a low stool, her face pale but steady. The porch board creaked again. Caleb took the rifle, not raising it, only holding it low. He crossed the kitchen with slow steps. The floor beneath his boots made no sound. Outside, the night pressed close against the walls, and every small noise seemed to grow teeth. "Who's there?" he called. For a moment, nothing answered. Then a man's voice came from beyond the door. "Don't shoot, Mr. Rusk, it's only me." Caleb knew that voice. "Billy Shaw." "Yes, sir." Clara frowned. "Billy." Caleb opened the door. A boy of maybe 16 stood on the porch with his hat in both hands and fear written plain across his face. Billy Shaw worked odd jobs around Mercy Creek, sweeping the blacksmith shop, loading crates at the mercantile, and helping with cattle when a rancher needed cheap hands. His coat was too thin for the cold, and one sleeve had a tear at the elbow. His dark hair stuck damp to his forehead. He looked past Caleb toward Clara, then lowered his eyes. "I didn't mean no harm," Billy said. Caleb's grip tightened on the doorframe. "Did you cut that fence?" Billy flinched. That was answer enough. Clara sat forward. "Billy, why would you do such a thing?" The boy's mouth trembled. "I was told to." "By who?" Caleb asked. Billy looked toward the yard as if someone might be hiding there. "I can't say." Caleb stepped onto the porch and closed the door halfway behind him, keeping Clara inside the warmth. His voice dropped low. "A woman could have been badly hurt tonight." "I know," Billy swallowed hard. "I saw her fall. I wanted to help, but I got scared. Then I saw you come riding, and I followed back to make sure she made it." Caleb studied him. The boy was shaking, not from cold alone. "Who paid you?" Billy wiped his nose with his sleeve. "No money, not yet." "Then what?" The boy looked miserable. "My ma owes at the company store near the mill. Man said he could see it forgiven. Said all I had to do was cut one rail and open the pasture. Said it would only cause trouble, not hurt nobody." Caleb's chest went tight. "What man?" Billy's eyes filled. "Mr. Ward's foreman." The name did not surprise Caleb, and that made it worse. Clara's voice came from inside, sharp with disbelief. "Elias." Caleb turned. She had risen from the chair and stood with one hand braced on the table, pain plain on her face. "I told you to stay seated," Caleb said. "And I did not ask." Even now, even hurt, even frightened, there she was, strong enough to stand against pain because truth had entered her house and she meant to face it. Billy took one step back. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennett. I swear I didn't know you'd be the one to ride out." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Anger passed over her face, then something softer, sadder. "You should have come to me," she said. "I was ashamed." "Shame has a way of making worse choices feel easier," Caleb said quietly. Billy nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Mr. Ward's foreman said if I talked, Ma's debt would be called in by Monday. We don't have it." Caleb opened the door wider. "Come inside before you freeze." Billy stared at him, as if he expected a blow more than kindness. "Inside," Caleb repeated. The boy stepped into the kitchen. Clara sank back into the chair, trying not to show how much the standing had cost her. Caleb saw it and moved the stool closer beneath her foot. She gave him a look that was half thanks, half stubborn pride. Billy stood near the door with his hat crushed in his hands. Caleb set the rifle aside. "Tell it plain, every word." The boy did. He told them how a man named Silas Boone, Ward's foreman, had found him behind the livery 2 days earlier. Silas knew about his mother's debt. He knew Billy had been asking for work. He knew fear could be shaped into obedience if pressed in the right place. Silas told him Miss Bennett's fence needed to fail just enough to make her feel her land was too much to handle alone. He said Mr. Ward wanted her to understand the danger of running a place without a proper husband. Clara's face went still. Not weak still. Dangerously still. "He said that?" she asked. Billy nodded. Caleb looked toward the stove because if he looked at Clara, the sorrow in him might turn into something too hot to hold. Elia's ward had not come to court her heart. He had come to corner her life. He wanted the fence cut before morning, Billy continued. Said he'd ride by tomorrow and offer help, said she'd be grateful. Caleb gave a bitter breath, a kindness arranged by cruelty. Billy looked down. I'm sorry. The kitchen fell quiet except for the tick of the stove and the wind pressing against the door. Clara reached for the edge of the table. Her hand was trembling now, not from fear, but from the pain of being treated like land to be managed. Caleb saw that tremble and stepped closer, then stopped himself, always stopping, always measuring, always waiting for permission from a life too short to grant it. Clara looked up at him. The sheriff. In the morning. Clara's jaw tightened. No, tonight. You can't ride. I did not say I would. Caleb understood then. You want me to go. I want the truth moving before Elias has time to bury it. Billy's face went white. He'll know I told. Caleb turned to him. Then you stay here, lock the door. Miss Bennett has a shotgun in the pantry. Clara blinked. How do you know that? You keep it behind the flour bin. A tired smile almost touched her mouth. You notice too much for a neighbor. The words landed gentle this time, but they cut deeper than anger. Caleb reached inside his shirt and pulled out the folded letter. He laid it on the table beside her hand. Clara stared at it. I was going to burn this, he said. Not because the words are untrue, because they are truer than anything I have ever written, and I was afraid they would ask more of you than I had a right to ask. Her eyes lifted to his. I have to go now, he said, before Ward has time to dress lies as concern, but if I come back and if you still wish it, I will read it to you myself. Clara's hand moved over the letter, not opening it, only holding it beneath her palm. When you come back, she said, do not say if. The words struck him harder than any plea. If you believe one honest word can mend years of silence, hold close to this story, because Caleb has finally taken the first step toward the truth, and the road ahead is darker than he knows. Caleb put on his hat and stepped into the cold. Behind him, Clara sat in the lantern glow with his hidden letter under her hand. Ahead of him, the road to Mercy Creek lay silver and empty. But halfway to town, beneath the cottonwoods near the dry wash, a rider moved out of the shadows and blocked his path. The rider beneath the cottonwoods sat still as a fence post, his horse dark against the moonlit road. Caleb drew Buck to a halt and kept his hand near the rifle resting along his saddle. He did not lift it. A man could be ready without being foolish, and Caleb had learned long ago that fear made poor decisions when it got hold of the reins. The rider moved forward, just enough for moonlight to touch his face. Silas Boone. He was a broad man with a square jaw, a heavy coat, and eyes that looked as if they had spent too many years judging the value of people by what they could be made to do. Caleb had seen him earlier that day near the livery, speaking with Elias Ward beside a polished black carriage. Silas had worn the same hard look then, only dressed in daylight. Late ride, Rusk, Silas said. Caleb kept his voice even, roads open. Not tonight. Buck shifted under him, sensing the tension. Caleb stroked the horse's neck once, slow and steady. I've got business in town, Caleb said. Business can wait till morning. Not this kind. Silas leaned forward in the saddle. You ought to think carefully. Folks who stick their noses into other men's affairs can find trouble waiting for them. Caleb looked at the man, then passed him toward Mercy Creek. The town lights were small and far, only a few yellow pinpricks against the dark. Clara was behind him with a swollen ankle and a letter under her hand. Billy Shaw was in her kitchen, scared half sick. Elias Ward was somewhere in town, likely sleeping under a clean quilt with his boots lined neat by the bed, trusting his lies to carry through morning. Caleb felt something shift inside him. For years he had stepped aside because he believed stepping aside was noble. He had mistaken quiet for goodness, fear for sacrifice, and self-denial for love. But there on that road, with Silas Boone blocking the way, Caleb understood a hard truth. Sometimes love was not soft. Sometimes love meant riding straight toward what frightened you. "I'll pass now," Caleb said. Silas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't listen well." "I listen fine, I just don't obey strangers." The smile left Silas's face. For one long second, neither man moved. The cottonwood leaves shivered overhead. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once and fell silent. Caleb could hear his own heartbeat, heavy and steady, like a hammer far off. Then Silas reached under his coat. Caleb moved faster. He lifted the rifle, not aiming to harm, only making the choice plain. "Keep your hand where I can see it." Silas froze. The object under his coat was not drawn, but Caleb saw enough of the handle to know it was a pistol. He also saw something else in Silas's eyes. Surprise. The man had expected the quiet rancher to fold. Caleb did not fold. "I am not here to spill blood," Caleb said, "and I do not aim to start tonight, but I will not turn around." Silas's jaw tightened. "Ward will ruin you." "Maybe. He can call in notes, buy debts, turn men away from you, make sure your cattle don't sell." Caleb swallowed. Each word struck a place where fear already lived. Split Rail Ranch was not strong enough to take many blows. One bad season could bend it. Two could break it. Elias Ward had money, influence, and the calm cruelty of a man who could make harm look like business. But then Caleb thought of Clara sitting alone in the lantern glow, her hand over his letter, telling him not to say if. "He can try," Caleb said. Silas stared at him, then gave a low laugh. "All this for a woman who will end up choosing the better man anyhow." Caleb's face hardened. "You do not know the first thing about better." He nudged Buck forward. For a moment Silas did not move. Caleb kept the rifle ready, his eyes fixed, his breath quiet. Buck walked one slow step, then another. The two horses came close enough that Caleb could see the dust on Silas's sleeve. At last, Silas pulled his horse aside. Caleb passed him without turning his back fully until there was enough distance between them. Then he rode on toward town, every sound behind him sharp in his ears. Silas did not follow. Mercy Creek was mostly asleep when Caleb reached it. The saloon still glowed at the far end of the street, and a few voices drifted from inside, soft with drink and late hours. The sheriff's office stood beside the jail, a low building with a lamp still burning in the window. Sheriff Amos Tully was a widower with tired eyes and a fair hand. He had known Caleb since Caleb first came into the valley with 2 cows, 1 horse, and more debt than sense. Caleb dismounted and knocked hard. The door opened after a moment. Sheriff Tully stood in his suspenders, gray hair mussed, one hand holding a lantern. "Rusk, what in thunder brings you here at this hour?" A fence was cut at Willow Bend. Clara Bennett was hurt, not bad, but enough. Billy Shaw says Ward's foreman put him to it. The sheriff's sleepiness vanished. "Come in." Caleb did. The office smelled of coffee, paper, gun oil, and cold ashes. He told the story plain. No flourishes, no guesses beyond what Billy had said. The sheriff listened without interrupting, his face growing darker by the minute. When Caleb finished, Amos set the lantern on the desk. "Where's the boy now?" "At Miss Bennett's house." "And Ward?" "In town." The sheriff reached for his coat. "We'll collect Billy first, then we'll speak with Ward." Caleb nodded, relief moving through him so quickly his legs almost felt weak. But before they could leave, hoofbeats sounded outside. "Fast ones." The sheriff looked at Caleb. Caleb turned toward the window. A horse stopped hard in the street. A moment later, Tom Braddock from the Mercantile burst through the door, breathing like he had run from fire. "Sheriff," Tom said, eyes wide, "you best come quick. Ward's men are at Willow Bend." Caleb's whole body went cold. Tom looked at him then, and his voice dropped. "They've got Miss Bennett outside on the porch." Caleb did not remember crossing the street. One moment he was inside Sheriff Tully's office, hearing Tom Braddock's words strike the room like hail on tin. The next, he was back in the saddle with Buck lunging beneath him, the sheriff riding hard at his side, and Tom following on a borrowed horse that looked none too pleased about being pulled from sleep. The town fell behind them. The road opened wide and pale beneath the moon. Caleb's thoughts ran faster than the horse. Clara outside on the porch. Ward's men at Willow Bend. Billy Shaw inside, frightened and cornered. And on Clara's kitchen table, the letter Caleb had spent years not saying. The night blurred at the edges. Wind cut into his eyes. He leaned low over Buck's neck and prayed in the rough, wordless way of men who did not often pray until they had no other handhold left. Do not let me be too late. The lights of Willow Bend appeared ahead, brighter than they should have been at that hour. Lanterns moved in the yard. Shadows crossed the porch. Caleb pulled Buck down only when Sheriff Tully lifted a hand. Slow, the sheriff said. No sense riding in blind. Caleb wanted to ignore him, but the old lawman's voice held the weight of sense. They eased off the road and came along the fence line, partly hidden by the willows near the creek. From there, Caleb could see everything. Clara stood on the porch in her shawl, one hand braced against the railing, her injured foot held lightly off the boards. Her face was pale in the lantern glow, but her chin was lifted. Billy Shaw stood behind her near the door, shaking so hard even at a distance Caleb could tell. At the bottom of the porch steps stood Elias Ward. He was dressed as neatly as if he had come calling at noon, not in the dead of night. His coat was buttoned, his hat straight, his gloves dark. Two of his men waited by the gate, and Silas Boone stood near the water trough with his arms crossed. Caleb felt the sheriff stiffen beside him. Looks like more than a friendly visit, Amos muttered. Ward's voice carried through the cold. Miss Bennett, I am trying to spare you embarrassment. That boy has clearly lied in panic. My foreman would never order such a foolish thing. Billy's voice cracked. You told him to, Mr. Ward. I heard Mr. Boone say your name. Silas stepped forward. Careful, boy. Clara put a hand back without looking and caught Billy by the sleeve, holding him in place. That small gesture nearly broke Caleb's heart. Hurt as she was, frightened as she must have been, she still stood between a scared boy and grown men. Do not threaten him on my porch, Clara said. Ward sighed softly as if disappointed in a child. Clara, listen to reason. You are tired, injured, and upset. This land is too much for one woman. Tonight proves it. Caleb's hands closed around the reins. There it was, the whole scheme dressed in concern. Ward took one slow step up toward the porch. Let me help you. Let me settle these troubles before they grow. A woman with your name and grace should not be wrestling broken rails in the dark. Clara's voice stayed quiet. The rail was broken because your man had it cut. Ward's expression cooled. You have no proof. Sheriff Tully nudged his horse out from the willows. I reckon that is why we came, he called. Every head turned. Caleb rode beside him into the yard. Clara's eyes found Caleb at once. For one breath, all the fear he had carried down that road met the courage she had been holding on that porch. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them said more than any greeting could have. Ward's face changed only a little. A flicker of irritation passed through his eyes, then vanished beneath polish. Sheriff, he said, this is a misunderstanding. Most men say that when I arrive after midnight, Amos answered. Strange how many misunderstandings happen in the dark. Silas moved away from the trough, but Caleb shifted Buck into his path. Stay where you are, Caleb said. Silas glared at him, but did not step farther. Sheriff Tully dismounted. Billy Shaw, come down here. Billy looked at Clara. She nodded. The boy came down the porch steps like each one might give way beneath him. Amos softened his voice. Son, you told Mr. Rusk that Silas Boone ordered you to cut Miss Bennett's fence. Is that true? Billy swallowed. Yes, sir. Did he offer payment? He said my ma's debt would be forgiven. Ward gave a small laugh. A frightened boy repeating foolish talk. Sheriff, you know better than to credit this. I know enough to keep listening, Amos said. Ward's gaze shifted to Caleb. And you, I should have guessed, a poor rancher sees a chance to stir suspicion against a man he cannot match. Caleb felt the old shame rise. Poor rancher cannot match. Those words knew where to strike, because they had lived in him long before Ward spoke them. For years, Caleb might have dropped his eyes. That night he did not. You are right about one thing, Caleb said. I cannot match you in money. Ward's mouth curved slightly. Caleb stepped down from Buck and stood in the yard with dust on his boots and moonlight on his face. I cannot match your carriages, your land, your hired men, or the fine way you make a threat sound like help. Clara watched him from the porch, her hand gripping the rail. But I can stand where I should have stood long ago, Caleb continued, and I can tell the truth. The yard went still. Ward's smile faded. Caleb turned to Clara, his voice gentled, but it did not weaken. You once told me plenty is not always what a heart is hungry for. I heard you. I was just too afraid to answer. Clara's eyes shone in the lantern light. Caleb drew a breath. I have loved you for years, Clara Bennett, not like a neighbor, not like a friend who comes by when fences fall. I have loved you in the mornings when you stood in your garden, in the winters when you brought soup to my door, in every quiet Tuesday and every hard season between. I stayed silent because I thought my little ranch made me unworthy of you. He looked briefly at Ward, then back at her. But tonight I learned a man can be poor in land and still rich in honor, and he can be rich in land and have nothing worth offering. Elias Ward's face darkened. Clara took one step forward, then winced as pain caught her ankle. Caleb moved toward her at once, but she lifted a hand, stopping him only because she wanted to stand on her own. You should have told me sooner, she said, her voice trembling. I know. You wasted years. I know that too. And that letter on my table. His face softened with sorrow and hope. Every word is yours if you still want to hear it. Before Clara could answer, a new voice cut across the yard. You might want to hear mine first. Everyone turned. An older woman stood at the open gate, wrapped in a dark shawl, her hair silver beneath a plain bonnet. Caleb recognized her after a moment as Ruth Shaw, Billy's mother. She held a small ledger book against her chest. Her eyes were fixed on Elias Ward. I kept the papers, Mr. Ward, she said. Every debt you bought, every threat sent through your men, and tonight I brought them with me. Ruth Shaw stood at the gate like a woman who had walked through fear and come out carrying proof. For a few seconds, no one moved. The lanterns around Willow Bend threw long shadows across the yard. The willows by the creek whispered in the wind. Billy stared at his mother with wet eyes, his thin shoulders lifting as if he had been holding his breath for days and only now remembered how to let it go. Ma, he whispered. Ruth did not look at him yet. Her eyes stayed on Elias Ward. The rich man's face had lost its smooth kindness. What remained was harder and colder, like stone under running water. Mrs. Shaw, Ward said, you are confused. No, Ruth answered. I was confused when your men came to my door saying my husband's old debt had changed hands. I was confused when the number grew, though I paid what I could. I was confused when your foreman said my boy might help himself by helping you. She lifted the ledger. But I am not confused tonight. Sheriff Tully stepped toward her. May I see that book, Ruth? She handed it over, though her fingers clung to it for a moment before letting go. That ledger was not just paper. Caleb could see that. It was months of worry, hunger, and shame written in a widow's careful hand. The sheriff opened it under the lantern. His eyes moved over the pages. His mouth tightened. What is it? Clara asked from the porch. Amos did not answer at once. He turned another page, then another. Names, he said finally, dates, payments, notes on who came collecting. Ward gave a short, controlled laugh. A widow's private scribbles are not law. No, Amos said, but they are a place to start. Sela's boon shifted near the water trough. Caleb saw it. Don't, Caleb warned. Sela stopped, but his hand curled at his side. Ruth finally looked at her son. The anger in her face cracked and grief showed through. Billy, come here. The boy ran to her like the child he still was. She wrapped one arm around him and pressed his head to her shoulder. His hat fell in the dust, and he began to cry without trying to hide it. I'm sorry, Ma, he sobbed. I thought I was helping. I know, she said, kissing his hair. I know, son. Clara's eyes softened. Her hand tightened on the porch rail, and Caleb could tell she wanted to go to them, but the pain in her ankle held her back. He moved toward the steps. This time she did not stop him. Caleb climbed onto the porch and stood beside her. He did not touch her, but he was close enough that if she swayed, he could catch her. Clara knew it. Her shoulder eased just a little. Ward looked from Ruth to Billy, then to the sheriff. This is becoming a theater show. You cannot seriously mean to take the word of a desperate woman and a frightened boy over mine. Sheriff Tully closed the ledger. I mean to ask questions in daylight with witnesses present. Until then, Mr. Boone is coming with me. Silas's eyes flashed. On what charge? Intimidation, conspiracy to damage property, and if Miss Bennett's injury worsens, we will add to that. Ward stepped forward. Sheriff, you are making a mistake. Amos looked at him. I have made plenty, this does not feel like one. For the first time, Ward seemed to understand that the night had turned against him. Not fully, not finally, but enough that his fine coat and polished words no longer shielded him. Silas spat into the dirt. All this fuss over one fence rail. Clara's voice cut through the yard. No, over the belief that people without power are easy to bend. Silas looked at her with contempt, but Ward lifted a hand, stopping him. His pride was wounded, yet his mind was still working. Miss Bennett, Ward said, changing his tone. You are angry, I understand, but you are placing trust in people who cannot protect you from what comes next. Caleb felt those words settle like cold dust. Clara looked at Ward, then at Caleb beside her. You keep speaking of protection as if it means ownership. That is not what I mean. It is exactly what you mean. Her voice was calm now, and somehow that made it stronger. My father knew your family, she continued. He respected your business sense, but he did not raise me to hand my life to a man who arranges fear and calls it care. Ward's face hardened again. Clara drew a breath and placed one hand on the porch post to steady herself. You will leave Willow Bend tonight. Tomorrow you will answer the sheriff's questions, and after that you will stay away from my land. Ward stared at her. Then his gaze moved to Caleb, and his mouth bent with bitterness. And you choose him. The yard went silent. Caleb felt old shame stir, waiting for Clara's answer like a wound waiting to be pressed. He looked down at his dusty boots, then forced himself to look up again. Whatever she said, he would stand there and hear it. Clara turned her face toward him. In the lantern light, with her hair loose from the fall and pain shadowing her eyes, she looked stronger than any sunrise Caleb had ever seen. I choose truth, she said. I choose the man who came when my horse ran home empty. I choose the man who has been showing me love for years while being too stubborn to name it. Her eyes held his. And yes, Elias, I choose Caleb. Something inside Caleb went still, then broke open so quietly he almost could not bear it. Ward put on his hat with sharp, angry movements. You will regret this. No, Clara said. I already know what regret looks like. It looks like silence held too long. Those words landed on Caleb as much as Ward. Sheriff Tully moved toward Silas. Boone, hands where I can see them. Silas looked to Ward, but Ward only turned away. A man like Elias Ward had no use for a servant once the servant became evidence. That abandonment seemed to drain the fight from Silas. He let the sheriff take him by the arm and lead him toward the road. Tom Braddock gathered Billy's fallen hat and handed it to Ruth. I'll ride with you back to town, Ruth. Make sure nobody troubles you. Ruth nodded, tired now. Thank you. Before she left, she looked up at Clara. Miss Bennett, I'm sorry my boy brought harm to your fence. Clara's expression gentled. He brought the truth after it, that matters more. Billy wiped his face with his sleeve. I'll mend it myself. Caleb spoke from the porch. You'll help me mend it. The boy nodded. If you have ever seen someone choose honesty even when fear was standing nearby, let this part stay with you. And if Caleb's quiet courage touched your heart, don't forget to like this story, because the deepest truth is still waiting inside that folded letter. One by one, the riders left the yard. Sheriff Tully took Silas toward town. Tom rode beside Ruth and Billy. Elia's ward climbed into his carriage without another word, but the look he cast back at Willow Bend held enough bitterness to chill the night. Then the carriage rolled away. At last the yard grew quiet. Only Caleb and Clara remained on the porch, with the lantern burning low beside the door and the wind moving soft through the willows. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Clara reached into the pocket of her shawl and drew out the folded letter. "I did not open it," she said. Caleb looked at the paper, then at her. His heart beat slow and hard. "I know, but I want to hear it now." The old fear rose in him one last time, whispering of poor land, weak fences, and all the ways he might not be enough. Caleb took the letter from her hand. This time he unfolded it. Caleb unfolded the letter with hands that had mended gates, pulled calves from cold mud, and held reins through storms without shaking. Now they shook over paper. Clara noticed, but she did not speak of it. She stood close beside him on the porch, her injured ankle resting lightly on the floorboards, one hand on the rail for balance. The night had quieted after all the riders left, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that comes after thunder, when the air still remembers the storm. The letter had been folded so long that the creases were deep. Caleb smoothed it against his palm. The lantern beside the door gave just enough light to read by. He drew one slow breath. "Clara," he began, and his voice nearly failed. He stopped. She did not rush him. That was one of the first things he had loved about her, though he had not named it then. Clara Bennett knew when to wait. She could wait beside a sickbed, beside a nervous horse, beside a field that needed rain. Now she waited beside a man who had spent years mistaking silence for safety. Caleb tried again. "Clara, if these words ever find you, it means I have become braver than I am tonight." His eyes closed for a moment. Clara's face softened. He kept reading. "I have loved you in ways I never had courage to name. I have loved you in the morning light when you carry feed to the hens with your sleeves rolled up. I have loved you in winter when you bring warmth into rooms that forgot how to hold it. I have loved you when you laugh at stubborn horses, when you stand quiet at your father's grave, when you pretend you are not tired because there is still work to do." The words trembled in the cold. Clara pressed her fingers to her mouth, but she did not look away. Caleb's voice grew rougher. "I have not told you because I fear I have too little to place in your hands. My house is plain. My barn leaks. My land asks more than it gives. I know what a hard life looks like, and I cannot bear the thought of asking you to share one because my heart is hungry." He swallowed. Clara's eyes filled now, not with weakness, but with the ache of hearing how long he had carried the wrong burden. "So I help where I can. I mend what breaks. I ride over when storms come. I learn your ways and call it neighborly because I do not know how to want you without feeling selfish. If love means wanting what is best for someone, then maybe my silence is the only gift I can give." Caleb stopped reading. His face had gone pale in the lantern glow. The last line hung between them like a door half open. Clara reached for the paper, not to take it from him, but to steady his hand around it. "That was not a gift," she said softly. "I know that now." "No," she said. "I want you to hear me. Silence can feel kind when you are the one holding it, but to the one waiting on the other side, it feels like being left alone." Caleb lowered his head. "I left you alone," he said. "In some ways." The honesty hurt, but the gentleness kept it from cutting too deep. Then Clara stepped closer, though the movement made her wince. Caleb reached for her at once, and this time he did not stop himself. His hand settled beneath her elbow, firm and careful. She looked down at his hand, then back at him. "Do not pull away," she said. He did not. For the first time, Caleb let himself stand beside her without apology. The lantern flame moved in the wind. In the yard, Juniper lowered her head near the trough. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird called across the creek. Clara touched the letter with her free hand. "Read the rest. There is only a little more." "Then read it." Caleb looked back at the page. "If there ever comes a day when I stand before you with these words, I hope I have learned that a man's worth is not measured only by the roof over his head or the cattle in his field. I hope I have learned that love does not become noble by hiding. And if I have not learned it yet, I pray you forgive me for taking so long." His voice broke on the final sentence. "Yours, whether spoken or silent, Caleb Rusk." The porch fell quiet. Clara took the letter from his hand and folded it along the old creases. She held it against her chest, not like a thing newly given, but like something that had been hers before she ever touched it. Caleb watched her with fear still standing somewhere in him, but smaller now. "I wrote that 2 winters ago," he said. "The night your chimney smoked wrong and I came over to fix the flue. I remembered. You made coffee. Strong, no sugar." He almost smiled. "I stayed too long." "You did not stay long enough." Those words came softly, but they changed the porch, the night, and Caleb's understanding of the years behind him. Then Clara reached into the pocket of her shawl and drew out a small blue ribbon, faded at the edges. Caleb knew it at once. It had tied around the bundle of dried sage he had left on her porch after her father died. He had picked it from the hillside because her father used to burn sage in the stove when sickness passed through town. "You kept that?" he asked. "I kept many things." She looked toward the house. "In the top drawer of my sewing table, there is a button from the coat you tore mending my roof, a note you left with a sack of flour when my stores ran low, a horseshoe nail from the day you fixed Juniper's shoe and refused payment. I did not keep them because they were useful, Caleb." His throat tightened. "I kept them because you were." A man could go years without crying and still feel something in him give way. Caleb's eyes shone, though no tears fell. He looked toward the dark shape of his own land beyond the road, the poor little ranch he had used as evidence against himself. For the first time, it looked different. Not grand, not easy, but honest, waiting. Clara leaned against him just enough to rest. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "The sheriff will question Ward. Folks will talk." "They already talk." "He may still try to hurt us through money." "Us?" Clara asked. Caleb looked at her, startled by his own word. Then he held it. "Yes," he said, "us, if you will have it so." Clara's smile was tired, tender, and full of tears. "I have been waiting a long time to hear that word." Before Caleb could answer, hoofbeats sounded again on the road. Both of them turned. A single rider approached Willow Bend at a hard pace. Not the sheriff, not Tom Braddock. The horse was too fine, the seat too stiff, the coat too clean even in darkness. Elias Ward came into the lantern light and stopped at the gate. His face was pale with anger, but his voice was calm. "Miss Bennett," he said, "before this town hears one more lie, there is something about your father's land you need to know." Elias Ward sat at the gate like a man making one final wager. Caleb stepped down from the porch, but Clara's hand caught his sleeve. "No," she said quietly, "let him speak from there." Ward's eyes moved to her injured ankle, then to Caleb's hand steady beneath her elbow. His mouth tightened. "Your father borrowed against Willow Bend," Ward said, "the year before he died." Clara's face changed. Caleb felt her fingers tighten on his sleeve. "That is not true," she said. Ward reached inside his coat and drew out a folded paper. "It is. A private note. Your father came to my office in Denver needing money after the drought. I was kind enough to help him." Clara stared at the paper as if it were a snake laid across the fence rail. "My father would have told me." "Would he?" Ward asked. "Or would he have spared you the shame?" Caleb took one step forward. "Careful." Ward ignored him. "The note comes due in 3 weeks. I came here to settle matters kindly. Marriage would have cleared the debt and kept the land under your feet, but since you prefer pride, I can take Willow Bend lawfully." The night seemed to grow colder. For a moment, Clara said nothing. She looked past Ward to the dark fields her father had plowed, the creek he had cleared by hand, the porch he had built for her mother before Clara was born. Pain crossed her face, but it did not bend her. "Bring the paper to the sheriff in the morning," she said. Ward smiled faintly. "I thought you might say that." He held the paper higher. Caleb saw the edge of the seal in the lantern light, and something about it troubled him. He had seen old Bennett's hand before. He had helped Clara sort receipts after the burial. Her father had written with heavy ink and a hard slant, each letter pressed deep into the paper. The signature on Ward's note looked too smooth. Before Caleb could speak, a voice came from the road behind Ward. "Let me see it." Sheriff Tully rode into the yard with Tom Braddock beside him. Ruth and Billy Shaw followed on a slower horse. The sheriff dismounted, walked to the gate, and held out his hand. Ward hesitated. "That paper concerns Miss Bennett," Amos said. "And if you came here after midnight to wave it in her face, it concerns me too." Ward handed it over with a stiff motion. The sheriff carried it to the porch lantern. Clara stood still as stone while he read. Caleb felt her tremble once and wanted badly to take the fear from her, but he knew some moments had to be stood through, not hidden from. Amos frowned. "Tom," he said, "you knew Samuel Bennett's writing. You handled his accounts at the mercantile." Tom stepped closer, squinting at the page. His brow drew tight. "That is not Sam Bennett's hand." Ward's face darkened. "You are a shopkeeper, not an expert." "No," Tom said, "but I watched him sign for flour, seed, tools, and coffee for 20 years. Sam made his capital B with a broken lower loop because his right hand never healed proper after the mill accident. This one is clean." Ruth Shaw looked up sharply. "My husband had papers with Ward's men too. Some of those signatures never looked right." The sheriff folded the note slowly. "Mr. Ward, I believe tomorrow's questions just grew longer." Ward's polished calm finally cracked. "You cannot hold me on gossip and guesswork." "No," Amos said, "but I can hold your foreman, your ledger dealings, a coerced boy, a cut fence, and a questionable debt note until the circuit judge arrives next week." Ward looked around the yard and saw no friendly face. Not one. The power he had carried into Mercy Creek had depended on people being frightened alone. Tonight, they were standing together. At last, he took a step back. "This town will regret crossing me." Clara's voice answered before anyone else could. "No, Elias, this town will remember it survived you." The words were quiet, but they ended him more completely than shouting ever could. Sheriff Tully took Ward back to town before sunrise. In the weeks that followed, the truth came out piece by piece. The note against Willow Bend was false. Ruth Shaw's ledger helped uncover other debts Ward had twisted through fear and pressure. Sela's Boone, abandoned by the man he served, told enough to save himself from carrying all the blame alone. Ward left Colorado before the first hard snow, not ruined by revenge, but by truth spoken in too many honest voices to bury. Billy Shaw worked every morning at Willow Bend until the cut fence stood stronger than before. Clara paid him in meals, coin, and the kind of respect that helps a young man stand straighter. Ruth's debt was cleared by the court. Tom Braddock kept a copy of her ledger behind the mercantile counter for years, just in case any rich man forgot poor people knew how to write things down. As for Caleb, he did not ask Clara anything grand that night. He simply stayed until morning, mended the stove fire, fed the hens, milked the cow badly enough that Clara laughed through her pain, and read the letter once more when the sun came over the creek. This time he did not stumble. By spring, Caleb came calling properly with a ring that had belonged to his mother. It was plain silver, worn thin at the back, but Clara looked at it as if he had brought her a piece of the morning sky. "I still have a little ranch," he told her. "And I still have a stubborn heart," she said. "They ought to suit each other." They married in June beneath the willow trees by the creek. The whole town came. Billy stood near the fence he had helped rebuild. Ruth cried into a handkerchief. Sheriff Tully pretended dust had blown into his eyes. And when Caleb took Clara's hand, he did not look like a poor man trying to deserve a rich blessing. He looked like a man who had finally learned what blessing was. Years later, when their children asked why their mother kept an old folded letter in a blue ribbon, Clara would smile and say, "Because your father wrote the truth long before he was brave enough to speak it." And Caleb, sitting on the porch with his boots dusty and his hand warm over hers, would look across the fields where Split Rail and Willow Bend had become one piece of land. The barn still leaned a little, the windmill still complained, the winters still came hard. but the fence between them was gone. If this story reminded you that love sometimes waits behind fear, leave a kind word for Caleb and Clara. And remember this, a heart is not measured by what it owns, but by what it is brave enough to give. That evening, under a gold Colorado sky, Clara placed the old letter back in the drawer, tied with the faded blue ribbon, while Caleb stood in the doorway smiling softly. At last, nothing true was hidden anymore.